Yeah, great pleasure to be here and to discuss the question of support structures for artists. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Bettina Klein from DAAD in Berlin, then François Quintin from the Fondation Galeries Lafayette, and Sophie Boukobza. Julie Boukobza.
But Sophie is great. I mean, it's just a new life
we're
starting.
making too many jokes about names before coming in, actually. From the 89 plus Google Residency in Paris also, and Rirkrit Tiravanija, artist based in New York, Chiang Mai, and Berlin. We want to start actually by giving a kind of brief insight into the different institutions that they're leading, that they initiated, and or are confronted with to a certain extent. What we are interested in is, of course, is also a larger context. We will use these institutions certainly to know a bit more about the question of support today, because in the context of a history of support structures for artists that is very complex, it seems to be very helpful to understand what's next or what the future might be. Because this history is certainly marked by very diverse philanthropes, sponsors. You can go back to the Medicis, or in more recent times, amazing figures like Maya Hoffman, or the private collectors of today, or museums that could be understood as support structures, as well as residency programs, travel grants, schools, or not to forget, support structures initiated by the artists themselves. And I think today we will see a variety of possibilities, whether they are privately funded, state-funded, or initiated by artists. And maybe we're going to start with Bettina and the DAAD, which is a very well-known program. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the practice of DAAD, maybe also in the frame of its history, which has been quite amazing if you look just at the names of the artists who have been there in Berlin.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So maybe at first, to simplify, people always say DAAD, but indeed it's called the DAAD Artists in Berlin program, Berliner Künstlerprogramm, because DAAD is actually a much bigger institution and also existing much longer than our program. So DAAD, which is actually a really academic exchange program for universities, for academics, and in 1963, there was the Henry Ford Foundation who actually had this idea to bring a new program to Berlin. It's very linked to the political history also of Berlin. It was like 2 years after the wall was constructed, and the aim was actually to create a bridge to the Western world and not to let Berlin become like too much of an island, which indeed it was, of course. And then, like 2 years later, DAAD only took over in 1965. So, yeah, we actually in 2 years ago we had our 50 years anniversary, and yeah. So in the first years, obviously, there were a lot of artists coming, like from the US, for instance, or Great Britain, France, Italy, and so on. And then, obviously, at the moment when the wall came down, the whole situation changed, and some people said, well, now your kind of Cold War program is obsolete in a way. Obviously, it's not, because in these years, like after the wall came down, we really started to invite a lot of artists from Eastern Europe also. For instance, it was like in the year '89 there was Kabakov, or in 1990 there was Kopistyansky's coming, later Boris Mikhailov, and so on. Like it was really this whole period also of making our art world a bit bigger and making the knowledge about non-Western art also bigger, which is still actually the aim of the program now. So even if now the Cold War seemed to be over, the perspective is still getting larger, and we are now aiming a lot for finding interesting artists in like, for instance, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and so on. So the program functions actually in a way that in the visual art section, I mean, because we have 4 sections, or 4 disciplines, like it's music, literature, film, and visual arts, and in all the other disciplines you can apply for the residency, but not in visual arts. So in visual arts it's a nomination process. So we're actually selecting 6 international artists, curators, sorry, that are each of them proposing 3 candidates. And then out of these 18 proposals, the jury selects, because we don't even have a voice actually in the jury, 6 artists per year. Yeah, so that's about the shape of the program.
François, what is the strategy in your institution, which is quite a recent one, and with a very different agenda, I guess?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. The Fondation Lafayette hasn't opened yet, really, even though we've started to work for about 2 years and a half, more or less. It's a foundation that has been initiated by Guillaume Mouzet. Guillaume, who is, among other things, the head of communication, marketing, and everything at the Galeries Lafayette, and a collector, and somebody who has real vision also about art and how to be useful to art. So he wanted to create this foundation in order to try to design a place that would be kind of he wanted to be useful to art. He wanted a place that would be more like a lab or something like that, and not a foundation to show his collection. So it's not going to be a place to show a collection. It's going to be a place for artists. So then we started to work together on this idea of how can we draw up a place that would be dedicated to art in a kind of broader sense, like art, fashion, design, kind of large view about what art is about. A place that would be a place for production, a place to produce works and help artists producing works. Not a factory, not just a place that would finance, not just a place of curating, but a place for that somehow would gather all those activities together in a space that is an old, beautiful Parisian building in Le Marais, in the center, that is refurbished by Rem Koolhaas right now. We just started the construction, or the work. And so the foundation is due to open at the beginning of 2017. And it will be a place that will be helping artists on, upon projects more to produce kind of long-term projects, and try to help them in many ways, not only financial but also technically. A place that will have a director of production, Dirk Meelaert, somebody who is really, able to manage the technical aspect and the relationship with artists. So I would say half of the activity would be non-visible, would be the activity of work, fabrication, prototyping, and everything, and half of the activity would be visible, would be like an exhibition space, where all the production will be shown. And through this, we really started to think about what production means in the arts, because everybody talk about production without having a precise idea what it means. Maybe it's because it doesn't have a precise definition at all. And production doesn't mean the same thing if you're a movie maker, a fashion designer, an artist, an architect, you know. So that's the interesting point about this also institution, is that we kind of question or try to find new models of production. What is a center of production today? What artists would need? And is it possible to think about an institution that would have some kind of organic, I would say, programmation, so that we can all the time change the perspective and work with artists on finding ways to achieve with, you know, what is important for them. So that's kind of a great line of what the Foundation ambitions to create.
Julie, I think your perspective is probably a very different one with your institution, and which I think merges two very unexpected things related to Google, the physicality and the virtual somehow, which is a bit cliché-esque what I'm saying, but it's maybe you can tell us a bit more about your project.
So we started a year and a half ago in Paris at the Google headquarters of Paris. So I'm working for 89+, I'm not working for Google, and Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Simon Castet, who founded 89+ 3 years ago. It's a research program and based on all the artists that were born in 89 and after. So Hans-Ulrich met actually Amit Sood, who's the head of a cultural institute, many years ago, and when they opened the Cultural Institute in Paris, last November in 2014, they decided to do a residency program, and they thought that 89+ was in the same mind, but because it was very experimental as well, and it was just starting, and the Cultural Institute was just starting as well. So we decided to try. It was a trial by fire. It was very experimental, and we were like inviting 3 artists at the same time for 10 weeks, and then we decided actually to invite them for longer for this time right now, and invited not only artists but also architects, graphic designers. We had also curators. Right now we have a curator who's there. And the most important thing about this residency is we're trying to pair this artist with engineers from the Cultural Institute. So it's a project that actually found his roots in the EAT program that Billy Kluver did in the 60s and 70s. And we did a book about it called NEAT, New Experiments in Art and Technologies. And so it's really how can we link artists with engineers, how this kind of two brains that we would think are like completely different brains can completely merge, and we realize that it's all about volunteering, that artists usually that really want to work with engineers can do it, but it's really about the will, because engineers in a way are also like artists. They're treated at Google as artists. That's how they describe them. They're the same generation mostly as the artists are. They're from 23 years old to 30 years old. They're very young, and they're also like the best engineers in the world working for Google. So it's a very interesting kind of expertise. And yeah, as you said, it's about physical and digital, because when artists come, they're like, it's the first time they're entering Google in a very physical and like very practical way. And seeing Google and how this aesthetic also influences their work. Like, for example, Jasper Spicero, who just showed in Paris, how at the new gallery, how his whole aesthetic, and he was doing a show in an abandoned prison in Portland. I mean, it's a long project that I could talk about for hours, but how his vision was influenced just by the aesthetic of Google, not even by talking to engineers. It's like many, many levels of influences and inspirations. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
That's all I can tell.
Of course, we never doubted on that. Rirkrit, you're the only artist here on this panel, which is important to mention. What is your example? Maybe we can start to discuss many more things about this support structures, but I think we discussed something quite specific as an example.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's great to be feel like an old institution like the DAAD because they're so young. We've been, well, I guess I'll speak as a kind of member of the Land Foundation, which is founded by artists. And originally we founded as a kind of retirement home for artists, right? So the idea was that artists would be very tired from all these art fairs and exhibitions, and they would need to retire from all of this to get away. And it was actually initiated kind of parallel. There was a project that we had, it was like a desire, not a project, but a desire by some artist friends in the West to find a place to get away. And we started to work on it with an institution in France. And then we found out that when you do things in Europe, you quickly run into bureaucracies. And you start to have problem in terms of maybe the idea of ownership or something. You know, that's supposed to be very kind of, open. So that program kind of stopped at some point. And then I went to Thailand and met a friend of mine, and we started to have this discussion, and he was saying, well, he's been working on a place with similar ideas with local artists. So I said, well, let's look into this. And he said, well, there's a piece of land down this, half an hour away, and we could buy it tomorrow. And I said, okay. So I said, we go and look at it, and it was like fairly inexpensive. So we said, okay, we just buy it. So we initiated that in 1997. And we thought, well, we'll just, open it up, we'll keep it, like, if anything at all, it could just at least be rice fields. It would be whatever it is already as it is. And slowly it got cultivated. A lot of different friends came through and started to, in a way, make contributions to this piece of land. And the idea was that, of course, it would be a kind of a living space. It was a place where we could go and rest and think and be away from the daily structures that we're in, and to actually be off the grid. So there's no electricity, no water, and we would have to survive off this place without the amenities you're used to. And slowly, because of that condition, it became a kind of a lab. So everyone tries to find a way so that they could still, get on the computer and do whatever and be in this non-space. When we started to work on it, we realized that there were young art students who were at the university, local university, that needed to find an alternative space outside of the school. Because, of course, the system of the university was very hierarchical. In Thai culture, you can't speak what you think when you're with, like, an elder. And, of course, the professors are the elders. So they were very frustrated to speak their mind. So we said, okay, here's a place where we can all go sit down and you can say whatever you want, how you think. And so in that sense, then it also became a kind of alternative space for young artists to have a dialogue. And about 10 years ago, my co-founder, Kamin Lechai, decided, through having been a professor at the university, decided he would make an alternative system outside the university by creating a residency program for, I guess initially for his students who were young artists. And the first year there was 25 students, or 25 young artists, and they all lived together in one room for a year. And part of that was that they would work together, live together, eat together, and then, kind of work on the land to sustain themselves. And it became a very, interesting experiment in the sense that, people had to stay together and in Thai culture, that's in a funny way a little easier than other places. The program was initiated to be on 1 year, off 1 year, on the other year, because everything at the land was kind of self-organized and self-funded. We have no funding. So we had to find a way to sustain ourselves and still, be able to support everyone. And then in the second session, we actually had artists from the West. So we had Japanese artists, we had some artists from New York, we had some artists from Ireland came. And most of the program is all through the word of mouth. So we never really advertise. We never, we're not so visible, except now we're like in front of the Basel Art Fair. But
yeah, Rirkrit, you hinted very much at the notion of a residency as also a trigger for a community in a way, or artists coming together and experiencing a moment of community or a practice of community, which I think is probably true for most of the examples we have heard about. How would you define that quality? Why is it necessary for artists to be in a residency, or what do you think actually about this notion of a residency in relation to an artistic career, which is, if you look at the fair, is still very much communicated as an individual career. I think a residency produces something slightly different because there is this potential of a community among different people joining into a residency. Is this something important for artists?
Well, I guess, I'm coming from, Thailand, for example. And and I would say like what we did in a way, like up to this point, was always based on needs, right? So we started the thing, and then we saw that the young artists needed a place to go and talk. So we said, okay, we'll build a house where everyone can come and sit down and talk. And they can talk amongst themselves, or they could talk to friends who comes to visit. They can talk to farmers who are in the neighborhood. So it's kind of always based on a need, and as we go along, we kind of observe and the needs change, then we change with the need. And so I think in Thailand, because we don't have any institutional support, it was necessary, at least for us, to make a platform where, young artists who went to university and college, after they leave those institutions, they don't have any other place to go. And for them to continue to still think and live and breathe as an artist, the easiest thing for us to do was to make a place for them to meet, Of course, through that, we maybe organize some exhibitions and things like that, but there is really no support at all. There is no market, there's no collectors at that point. There was probably actually there were 2 alternative spaces, and those alternative spaces they were in Bangkok, which is the big capital. And of course, and that even the alternative spaces were showing actually more established artists, because those established artists didn't have spaces to show, So it's a kind of trickle-down necessity.
How would you define support in your institutions? I don't know if someone wants to react to in a more general sense. What is support, and what's needed, and what can you offer? Maybe DAAD, since you have this amazing experience, and
you mean the long-term experience? Yeah, this is also what one could say about the aspect of community at DAAD, because it's more like expanded in time in a way. It's really about this idea also of former guests that are connecting to the ones that are there at the moment. Many artists are actually staying also in Berlin. At the moment, At the moment, we have about 75% of artists staying after their residency in Berlin.
Is it a good thing?
Yeah, of course.
Or has no, of course, for Berlin it's fantastic. But does it somehow counter the idea of DAAD as a residency?
mean, as an internationalization, because they all become Berliners? No, I think mainly most of them still have like Berlin is like a pied-à-terre, like they have, of course, still other connections, and they bring in a lot of international connections still. No, but in terms of this community, I mean, we also have this possibility to do re-invitations actually. So an artist who has been there for a year and who had his apartment and stipend and studio can come back also for a certain period if we want to make a project. And this idea is actually, I think, crucial for our program, that you have no obligations at all. It's really like complete freedom to spend 1 year in Berlin. You don't have to produce at all. You don't have to do an exhibition or do a book or whatever. You can also decide to just do research for yourself or rethink about what you've done so far.
I wanted to say that the Fondation Lafayette is not a place of residency, which I think is interesting also to point out, is this idea that a residency is more a place that articulates something about the idea of the physical presence of the artist, and that this physical presence we have kind of positive relationship with what is surrounding, like for instance at Google, where there is this proximity with people that have like a very specific know-how, where we're thinking in a different way. It's more like what is present is more like the project, you know, and then the idea of such a space is trying to figure out what would be the configuration so that we could achieve the project from A to Z, and how we can draw up some kind of collective intelligence throughout the time of the project, whether the artist is physically present or not, you know. As an example, we were participating in the Annika Yi exhibition, which is right now at the Kunsthalle, which I think we should all see. It's a beautiful exhibition, and for that we worked with Annika on creating this very peculiar catalog, which is a catalog made to be burned, which is her first monograph, and which is supposed to be burnt. It's like, you know, that kind of paper, like incense paper that burns and releases some perfume, which she designed. So she came to Paris, she designed the idea, the perfume, she met with a perfume maker, and then we find ways to do this thing, which is a crazy production, I must say, even though it looks like any other kind of books, but it's a crazy production. And then she left. She was in residency at the MIT at the time, so she had to stay there. She was like really in a residency physical thing, where she could work with us at the same time on a project without being physically present, even though we were very much occupied with this project throughout the year. So I like this idea also that one of the ways to be useful is also to be involved from beginning to the end on a project and make it happen, you know.
How is it at 89 Plus? Is there, how would you define that aspect of support, community, and maybe you can also describe a little bit what is expected from those who join in? Are there criteria that they have to apply with a certain project?
Yeah, the difference I would say is the selection process, because we select very carefully our residents. It's through all the research that Hirsch and Simon made throughout, like workshops, talks, marathons, and things like this, that we select few artists that we ask for a proposal, and then we will really look carefully how can we help them. Google is not part of the selection process. Only at the end, when we start selecting few of them, we show them, and they say if it can help them or not in a technical support, like in a technical way. And we want to see how they can push all the boundaries of these technologies, how we can abuse with all these technologies. And it's how the engineers can be part of this, how can they have a very fruitful conversation. So I think the big difference maybe with all the residencies here is the selection process, because it's we would really try to answer like specific needs.
Yeah, the Land Foundation doesn't have a selection process. So if 5 people show up, it's 5. If 100 show up, it's 100. and then we find, but mainly it's a self-selecting process. So because you come and you live on this in this place, which is not that comfortable. It's like, you know, you have to live in this kind of off-the-grid way. So in a way, you know, people who stay are, you know, are staying at their own will, you know. So and in that sense, and we're like, I mean, everyone is, you know, kind of self-selecting. And so we tend to, and then we don't, we leave it open. You could be, you know, 80 years old, we'll take you. You could be, you know, 15, we'll take you. You know, so we're, I mean, as, you know, as open as we can be.
But we had Douglas Copeland, who's not 89 plus, so we do exceptions. we make our own rules that we break every day, so.
I mean, I say that because we don't make any rules. That's part of the thing that we are able to do because we're not really, I mean, first we're in a place quite far, and if you come that far, you have to, you know, you are definitely coming to be there, you know, so. And we've had like people gone through there, and we stay in touch, we see each other, and they keep in touch, and so it's a really becomes a community even if they go, you know, at a distance. So it's interesting that way.
I think in that respect, the protocols of selection, application, decision-making has, at least in my view, quite an important impact on the character, on the mechanism of these institutions, if we can call them like them. Because what I see, maybe you can comment on that, is that there is also a new generation of young artists who are very experienced to all sorts of applications. So it's a kind of residency generation, moving from one residency to the other. And many institutions, certainly not yours, tend to define goals, to link the residency to a task or to a project proposal, which sometimes also instrumentalizes the whole idea of the residency and maybe also the freedom and openness that is required. Maybe you can maybe you can comment on this aspect in the sense, well, where are the limits of openness? Because of course we can all promise openness, but we can only feel the real condition when we test the limits of openness. So how would you define that?
I mean, we are quite often confronted with this question because sometimes we have artists that could as well be in, for instance, the music department, like Emeka Ogbo, for instance, artist from Nigeria who just showed a piece at Venice Biennial. He already worked with one of my colleagues, like from the music department before, but then was actually invited in the visual arts. This happens quite often, but like I mean, there could even be more. It could be more fluent, maybe in this sense, between the disciplines. It happens once in a while, but. And then, like, of course, we also don't have any age restrictions, so we have very young and very, like, I don't say very old, of course, but like older artists as well, and people that are quite famous already in their region, for instance, where they come from, or even like one could say famous already in Africa, but not in Europe, or like, and then. Yeah, but restriction is actually for us only like that it has to be international artists, and I think this should be, of course, kept as a principle. Yeah.
Well, it's. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to talk always about the institution that I represent, and I think it's more interesting to raise the thing. And I think it's a very interesting topic. I think the only openness possible is the one you mentioned. Like, you know, any artist come, stay. I mean, that's that's so beautiful. I mean, that's just perfect. I mean, that's what it maybe it should be in some cases, in some situations like that. But then there's many examples. I was thinking of, for instance, the Rijks Academy, where the idea of selection is very, very strong and has always been. And this idea that there would be like, I don't know, thousands of applications, and I remember they would take like, I don't know, a week or so to study them, to listen to all the proposals, to discuss the proposals. It was really very much, and it's still actually really much about application. But then there's also maybe a parallel to do with the fact that most of the residents are not don't have the same means. They don't have the same money to work, and there are a lot of residencies where actually the means are very different. And you have in the same residencies people that have much more means than others, you know, according to the city or the country they're coming from, and how they, you know, founded and what kind of grants they have, and so there's also this relationship which is kind of interesting, is the fact that you know, in one residency you don't have necessarily the same. So there's not a lot of things that are kind of unequal. And for us, it's not a question, because there's no application at the Fondation. We have a platform of curators. I'm working with 3 curators, and we try to find also some sort of collective intelligence, so that we try to, you know, bring as much as possible, you know, interesting projects, and see with artists what they need, what their needs are. And all the curators live in different countries, so there's no application actually, but it's, you know, open to any proposals. But
I would just say that our residency is a big, like, it's a mise en abîme. There's always a residency in the residency. For example, right now we have this curator, Felix Gautlist, and he invited artists to do mini residencies at Google. So we always want to try to go more deep and like try to see how we can let go within this kind of very specific frame, how we can also leave a complete freedom to the artists. So he invited artists for 1 week to work at Google. He learned all the technologies in order to kind of show them how to work with them. So it's always like meta residency within the residency. All the artists live together, so it creates also always like different dialogues. So it's kind of open-ended. And
Rirkrit, you are here somehow in a double position in a way, representing the land as a project which could be defined as a residency. On the other hand, you are a practicing artist. And how would you describe that from that perspective? When you read your official short bio, it says lives and works in New York, Berlin, and Chiang Mai. But how does that practice reflect the idea of a residency? How have you reacted to residencies you did in your career?
Well, I hate to apply to residencies. I mean, I hate the the idea of having to apply to anything. I mean, you know, forget residency. Even grants, I refuse to do them. Partly because I just can't. I don't have the time to think about it, and it seemed to maybe. I mean, once you start to think about it, then you are like, you know, like possessed by it in a way. So you start to become the form or something. So I avoid all kinds of application forms, you know. And I mean, if people say, "Oh, you just got invited," then I probably would do it. But yeah, it's easier for me to be like a platform for other people, but it's hard for me to like use other people's platform in that way, you know. So, and I think, I mean, for me, I mean, the Land Foundation has been, you know, funded and run by basically 2 artists, you know, and some friends. And we're very, you know, as artists, we're like terrible fundraisers. We have a hard time. I mean, I have a hard time dealing with Kickstarter or the idea of Kickstarter. But, you know, so, I mean, yeah, I mean, so we're able to be free and open because we have no money. That's basically it.
I think in a sense, it seems that the notion of invitation that you used is quite crucial to understand, even within the context of applications and bureaucracy. And I have the feeling that the institutions that you represent try to find a way to turn bureaucracy into an invitation, hopefully. And apropos invitation, it's now the moment also to invite the audience for questions and hopefully questions that can be answered, I'm sure. Are there any questions? Yeah, over here.
Hello. I am very curious about the Land Foundation, and I have 3 questions, very short, but to develop in my mind is a beautiful utopia, at the same time is a reality. For example, describe me please, how is the place, how empty it is. I don't want to look at the internet, please, if you can describe me now. Second, what is the longest staying of an artist? I mean, how is the longest period of resistance to that imaginary emptiness? And third is how you saw your artists. Is that helping really? Because all of us, we need to go out from this saturation. How is affecting the creation that they are doing? You see something different?
Well, let's go from the last one first. Well, I think what I find important in terms of like how people come there and spend their time there is that it becomes a kind of communal structure. And it's not so much like that one makes things, but one forms relationship, right, in this place. And when it's kind of like being put on a deserted island, and then you have to live with, 100 other people, and you have to all work together to survive that place. So in that way, it's kind of has that sense of desperation, maybe. The place, it's off the grid, but it's not like away in an isolated place. So there are people next door who has lights and television. But we stay off the grid partly because of bureaucracy, because once you put electricity or water into it, you have to have an address. And once you have an address, you have to, start to become a place. And so the idea of not having that kind of bureaucracy keeps us off the books in a way. And that way we can do many things, maybe sometimes not so legal, but that's our way of like staying maybe a bit on a kind of free side of bureaucracy. Well, there's a lot of water because it's Thailand. We have a lot of water. We have more water than we have land in a way. Part of the problem is almost water. We have too much water at some point. When the monsoon comes, it floods. And so it's very difficult to stay there sometimes. And when we ask people, or if people propose to build a structure there or make some kind of space there, we always ask them that they make it at a certain elevation and that they be aware that at some point in the year everything gets flooded. And this is kind of like one of the main problem with what we are. We don't have like complete infrastructure in that way. So we're sitting here in a way because I have a kind of proposal outside there, which is based on the need to have something more substantial to survive those kinds of conditions. So this kind of structure you see outside, which is standing in front of on the Metzerplatz, is a kind of proposal for what we would like to eventually build in Thailand to sustain ourselves, in better condition. It's a rice field with a lot of green, and it's things grow. You just put the seed in the ground, and everything grows. Sometimes it's growing too fast, but you know, I mean, you can live off everything that grows there, and so in that way, you don't need a lot. Well, we have no maximum, you know, but the one main thing that we always say.
That's very polite.
Beautiful.
No, so you can stay there as long as you want. We
Not at the fair.
Yeah, not at the fair. But you know, we ask that people don't become possessive about, you know, what they do there. So everything you build there belongs to the public.
Are there any other questions? I think we have one or two left. Apparently not.
People are afraid to be trapped.
Yeah, you all want to leave, apparently, and not to be trapped here at the fair. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to our guests and these insights in partly very traditional and
Not only traditional,
not traditional,
I hope.
traditional and experimental institutions, others really young and exciting and promising. We will probably hear much more of your institutions in the next few years, and also from the land, hopefully. So please come all outside to the fair to Do We Dream Under the Same Sky. Thank you.